Okay, so this talk is going to be hyper cheesy. I'm sorry, I'm a cheesy individual. So we're going to talk about Workbox service workers, and there's going to be lots of wizard themed jokes. So if that's too much, I'm sorry. If you get up and walk out, I completely understand. I'm also a little bit sleep deprived, so if it's all a hot mess, please forgive me. It's been a long week and it's only Wednesday. Okay, so that's me. It's a relatively remarkable likeness of me. I'm Mike. I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies. I'm not entirely sure how that happened either, but there it is. I work for a company called BBD, which you may know of. We do bespoke software development. I have to show this slide so I can throw stress balls out that are BBD branded, right? That's the only, it was the base negotiation for me to get swag. I work in the R&D team there, where, you know, on paper we do research and development, training, consulting, which is why it's been a long week. But the honest answer is that we're not really sure what we do on a day-to-day basis. We do stuff, right? And they still pay us, so I'm assuming it's still working out, right? It's okay. I'm also going to take the opportunity to shamelessly plug before they notice. I'm an organizer for JoeZjs. So if you're interested in JavaScript stuff, you should totally come visit us as well. It's really, really cool. We have lots of awesome speakers. Yay. Okay. And let's move on from there. So as you might know, I am that obnoxious JavaScript guy. And this is a wizard-themed talk, and I very much would like to see myself as this. But I think the reality is probably far closer to this. And I've got a little bit of a reputation, so understand where you're coming from and what you're in for. So why are we here tonight? Okay, we're going to talk about progressive web apps. Okay, and I'm just going to do a very brief overall of the gamut of what it means when we say progressive web apps before I dig into a little bit more detail. So progressive web apps are a buzzword that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. There's no neat and tidy answer. When we talk about progressive web apps, like there's a cheesy acronym called FIRE that we look at. We're looking at it characterizing these modern web experiences that are fast, right? That are blazingly quick globally, irrespective of network conditions, that are deeply integrated into our operating systems, into our browsers, that we know what the stuff can do, right? You know your browser and the functionality that it exposes, and we see progressive web apps as being this thing that works in your space, in user space, in the same way that we expect normal apps to do, you know, on your phone. We expect them to be reliable, right? To work in the conditions that we are going to face on a day-to-day basis, right? We're going to lose connectivity. You know, we're going to be without data. We're going to run out of airtime. These are things that the application needs to do if it's going to be a really modern web experience. We also expect them to be engaging, right? We're tired of just long documents when we're talking in the space of applications. We want rich UX. We want them to be treat the user as a first-class citizen rather than the server. Okay. And those are very, very high level and cover a whole bunch of stuff. And there are very many facets that you can drill into with this. And I'm not going to cover any of those. With any kind of hype-driven or buzzword-oriented movement that's sort of ephemeral, there's always that one kernel, that one thing that everything hinges around. And for me, I think that's the service worker. Okay. So the rest of the talk is going to be about the service worker, because I think that's the real heart and soul of what enables these progressive modern web experiences. Now, when we say service worker, I'm not sure if anyone is really familiar with what we mean by that. So the service worker is basically just another JavaScript thread that you have access to. So JavaScript is single-threaded. The browser front end only has one to work with, so it's got to use it wisely. Service worker adds another one that has dedicated network access, right? So it basically acts as this intercept between your web page and the rest of the world, be that your server, be that the global internet, a third-party provider, whatever the case may be. Now this lets us do cool stuff, right? Like you can think of it almost like a reverse proxy. And anything that you could do in a reverse proxy or a proxy in any sense from a server-side perspective, you can now do in JavaScript. We can do first-class caching support, right? So catching things that are outgoing and keeping a local copy so that we can reliably serve it if the network is down. Okay, we can fetch stuff eagerly and make sure that when the next request comes in, we can answer it before the browser even hits the network stack, which is amazing, right? We can keep a longer-lived background worker open that can service multiple browser tabs and listen to push notifications from the server and then meaningfully do stuff across multiple browser tabs, which is amazing, right? So we get this ability to do really, really, really smart stuff. Now, the problem with being able to do smart stuff is that doing smart stuff is hard, at least for me. And Serviceworker is really well designed, has an access to some amazing stuff, but some of it's very difficult to use, okay? And that brings us to Workbox, okay? Now, Workbox is an abstraction layer that sits on top of Serviceworker. It's both a set of tooling that lets you build service workers far more readily and far more easily, as well as a whole bunch of abstraction layers that you can use at runtime, right, that you can literally deploy with your code. I like it. It suits the idioms that I work with, but you may have experience with other service worker tool sets or technologies. Like, has anybody built or tried to build a progressive web app? Okay, have you used SW precache possibly? Okay, have you used NGSW in an Angular's perspective? So some of these bits and pieces will seem familiar to you. I feel that Workbox is the step to the next generation of that tooling. Okay, so some of it's going to look similar, and particularly SW precache. Workbox is seen as a spiritual successor of it. Okay. All right, so now remember that hot mess warning, right? We're in this together, okay? Whenever you get to live demo stuff, there's lots that can go wrong, and I expect everybody to have the eagle eyes for when I make a mistake, okay? And I think we're just going to get straight to it. So I'm going to start off, end the thing. End the thing, is the thing ended? The thing is ended, okay. So we're going to start off, and I'm going to start off with this, oopsie. You know, the one thing you can never practice is the angle that you're going to type at when you stand. Unfortunately, like, it's just a thing that doesn't happen. So we're going to open Chrome in incognito mode. Yes, it's purple, I know, so that I know that it's the incognito browser window. It's not that I'm embarrassed of my browser history or anything. It's just a lot easier to work with this stuff. No, really, that's the answer. Okay, so we've got this simple application that some of you may recognize. This is the Polymer shop. It is the sample progressive web app, full e-commerce store that comes with the Polymer starter kit, right? Which has been renovated a little bit with Polymer 3, and it actually comes with a full set of SW precache service worker generated bits and pieces, which are obviously stripped out of it because I like Workbox. And I think it makes a really cool exercise to look at how we would take this progressive web app and then incorporate Workbox into it. So when you take a look at it, it's got a couple sections that you can click through. You can click and buy t-shirts and check out and so on and so forth. Okay, there are things that you can do. There's no service worker installed on the right-hand side. Oopsie. Just need to zoom in there so that anyone else other than me can see. There's no service worker installed. And if you look at the network stack, right, there's quite a lot of bits and pieces that go backwards and forwards. Okay, so we're going to start off by switching this off, and we're going to Workboxify this. So the first thing that you would need is you would need to install Workbox CLI, which just I like installing as a CLI module. There are lots of other ways to do this. You can use a Webpack plugin. This doesn't use the Webpack plugin because I try and avoid that. Webpack is black magic in its own right, you know. So for purposes of illustration, we're just going to use the CLI, and that works fine. Okay, I've installed it already, so I'm not going to go any further. And then possibly my favorite command in the history of CLI commands, Workbox Wizard gets you started. And I'm not saying that wizards make everything better, but wait, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. Okay, so at Workbox Wizard, immediately it gets you a whole bunch of options. It says, cool, what is the root of your web app? What are you going to deploy? And there's a whole bunch of stuff. Am I in the right directory? I am in the right directory. There's a whole bunch of stuff. There's the build directory, there's the data, images, server test, blah, blah, blah. But now I know, and I'm going to just peek behind the curtain here a little bit. Oops, no, not that far behind the curtain. We are a good wizard after all. That in our build folder, we've got a build default that this project is designed to build it as, right? So all of my compiled resources that I've just published end up in here. And Workbox isn't picking that up out of the build, so I'm just going to manually enter a path and go build default, just to make things a bit easier. Okay. It then says, well, which file types would you like to pre-cache? And typically you would say, yes, everything. Well, maybe, depends. But for purposes of illustration, we're going to not cache the images and the JSON data. We're just going to cache the HTML and JavaScript. Okay, can everyone see that? Everyone cool? Then it says, well, where would you like your Serviceworker file to be saved? And it's by default going to have where you deploy your application to, because service workers are a deployment concern. And that's awesome. We're just going to leave that there. And the configuration options are just going to be created in the Workbox config.js file, which we're going to dig into in a bit. Okay, done. It then spits out this command that called generate SW, which we're going to use to just generate the service worker and show off something. Now, the first thing that happens is we can see here that it's found a whole bunch of stuff, and 7 files are going to be pre-cached, totaling 414 kilobytes, which is quite a lot, actually, right, on initial page load. That's a reasonably sizable application. And if we look at what this means, that means that we've got this SW.js file that's been created. Okay? And this SW.js, before I click on it, is created from this Workbox config. And this Workbox config is saying, well, there's the directory that we're going to be building into. This is the stuff, the regex of stuff that we're going to look for. And that's where I want you to put the thing. Okay, so there's no black magic here. And this is very similar to what you would find with a pre-cache config and NGSW, if you've used those bits and pieces. Then, when you look at the service worker itself, it does a whole bunch of stuff. I'm just going to... It's got a bunch of comments, which is fine. We're going to ignore those. It doesn't import scripts from a global CDN, which is fine. I'm going to leave that. It's got this pre-cache manifest variable that it creates locally, and a whole bunch of the resources that it's picked up with a revision hash. So if they change, if the file changes, it'll know to pick up the latest version. Okay. Then it goes and suppresses warnings, which immediately makes you feel comfortable, right? I feel far more comfortable with that being in there. I still haven't unpacked why that is. And then it pre-caches and routes with that data. So not very complex, but not very pretty code. So this is all good and well, and we've got a service worker, but the application itself is completely unaware of the service worker, right? So we have to register it. And that's not very difficult. We're going to do that in our index.html, just at the end of the body. Right after the performance stuff, why not? Okay. And all we do is we create a script tag, and we do this bit. Now, for those of you, just a quick show of hands, for whom is progressive enhancement a new thing? Do you not know what those modes mean? Okay, so basically what that's saying is we're going to try and see whether that feature is available. So by looking for the service worker string in Navigator, we're using the JavaScript feature that lets us see, well, does this property exist? In the global Navigator object, is service worker there? Now, if service worker is there, we can assume a whole bunch of stuff. Because that's the nice thing about Service Worker is that it's the save point, that if you have it, you have access to IndexedDB, you have access to a whole bunch of really, really modern JavaScript features, which we're going to use, and you'll see. Then what we do is we say, okay, awesome, it's there, so we can call this stuff. We're going to call navigator.serviceworker and register, and then just pass through the sw.js that we generated. Okay? Now, if Service Worker isn't there, none of this stuff runs, and you still have a website, which is pretty cool, right? And that's the nice thing about progressive enhancement. So for this, however, we now need to rebuild the application, which is going to take a while. So npm run build static. Okay. Well, not Angular while, but like Polymer while, because it's faster. No, that was cringy. It is Polymer 3. Of course it's Polymer 3. For sure. Okay, and then we need to do our generate service worker again, which is over there. I'm just going to go up and hit enter. And then we need to go and find our HTTP server. And I'm just using the built-in HTTP, well, a node CLI called HTTP server. It's not ideal, but it's really, really easy. And you'll see that if I accidentally hit refresh in the wrong place, the HTTP server breaks. The -C that you see there is not black magic. It's just saying I don't want the server to cache anything. Okay, I want it all to be so that the service worker handles all of that caching stuff. All right, but I'm going to run that anyway. And then we're going to take a look here. See, if I refresh now, it's going to break. But if I go back to the root and refresh, now I'm going to go to the application tab. And now you'll see that there's a service worker that's received and activated in the page. Okay, it's then additionally gone, and it's, as a part of the service worker, all the stuff with the little gears there, if you can see it, it's gone and fetched all the bits and pieces aggressively ahead of time and cached it locally. And where it's put that stuff is inside this thing called pre-cache there. And you can see all of those JavaScript files that it's picked up, and it said, well, I'm going to save it locally, here are my sizes, blah, blah, blah. And now when I refresh the whole page, oopsie. No, not that. Damn it. See what I mean about the refresh in the wrong place. Okay, when I refresh the whole page, you will see that the initial assets serve from Service Worker. And when I start navigating around the site, the JavaScript comes from Service Worker there and from Service Worker there. Which is cool, but there's still a whole bunch of stuff that's not via Service Worker. So we want to get hold of the images and the data and so on and so forth. Now, we could stretch this a little bit further and use the config itself to feed a whole bunch of that information from it. So if you're comfortable with the config-oriented approach, Workbox will let you go there, but I like writing JavaScript, not writing configuration stuff. Okay? So I'm going to write some imperative code now. And thankfully, what I get to do is I get to create a template service worker in my source file. So I'm just going to create a new sw.js, which I'm going to put there. Let me check my notes, make sure I'm not going off script. Yes. Okay, I'm going to put an sw.js there, and inside here, I'm going to 3, I think it was. Yes. I'm going to do essentially exactly what was in that service worker minus all the comments. We're going to get the Workbox libraries from a CDN. We're going to create this variable, this const called precache manifest. Rather than putting it on self, we're just going to create it as a constant. We're going to suppress warnings because if Google's doing it, that's basically giving us permission to do it ourselves, right? I'm afraid of what happens if I take that off, just in case the demo breaks. And then we're going to precache and root. But now the immediate problem is that this thing is empty, right? So luckily, what you can do is you can, in your Workbox config, specify that we want to, oopsie, too much scrolling. We firstly want to say that's where we're going to find our source service worker, and this is the variable that we're going to look for and where we want to place the stuff that we're going to inject from a pre-caching manifest perspective. Okay, and this is just regex. So that can be whatever you want. You can make that as simple or as complicated as you want. That's just the incantation of regex that worked for me. The install stuff is fine. The only challenge that we've got after this is that we have to use a different method. We can't use generate SW anymore. We have to do something called Workbox inject manifest, and then workbox config.js. Okay, so that's going to use the inject manifest command with our config to write into the same place. Now, if we take a look at the file that gets generated over here, no, that's the source one. That was bound to happen at some point. If we take a look at the file that gets generated over here, it's exactly the same as the template, except all of the pre-cache stuff was configured in there, which is cool. Okay, so we're exactly where we wanted to be, and we haven't benefited anything. So I'm not going to run this stuff because I don't think that's very valuable. I'm immediately going to move on to the next thing, okay? Because I want to look at some runtime caching options where I can write some actual code. Now, don't write in the generated file, write in the source file. Otherwise, that's going to make for an interesting demo. Okay, so in here, everything in Workbox is basically a root. Very MVC-esque, if anybody has worked with an MVC framework. So you get to go workbox.routing.register root. Okay, and in register root, it takes 2 arguments. Okay, so the first argument is regex, which we're going to replace in a second. And the second argument is something called a strategy. Okay, so we can now go workbox.strategies.cache first, for example's sake, and then accept some config. There's an optional third part where you can specify the method, so you can treat posts and gets and puts separately, which is super useful. Yeah?
Can you specify how long the cache lasts?
Oh, you just wait. Okay, so let's actually get straight to that. So was it 5? I think it was 5. Yes. Okay. So here's one that I baked earlier, which includes the ability to cache all of the images, and we're going to use a cache first strategy. Now what that means is it's going to look in the cache before it does any network work to see if it finds it. Okay. So if there's anything in there, it's just not going to send it across. Now one of the things we can do with this is we can specify a whole bunch of plugins. Okay. Plugins to this routing configuration. And basically what we do with that, and what we're going to do in this sense, is we're going to create something called an expiration plugin. And that expiration plugin is going to say, well, I don't want to download every image that the site ever accesses. Because if it's a big catalog, there are going to be thousands of images, many, many megabytes, and it's going to waste user space. I only really want to download or keep access of the last number of things, or a finite number of them, so that I don't waste user space, because then the browser is not going to start crunching me. So I'm going to specify max entries, and I'm also going to say, well, if the image is longer than 30 days in this case, or it can be a lot shorter, I really don't care about it anymore. Throw it away. And this can be as aggressive as you want. Okay. And with this, if I haven't made any mistakes, I'm going to be able to inject manifest, restart it. Okay. And then if we go here, I'm going to start with the application panel, which is just in Chrome. It's in the Chrome DevTools. And if I go back to the shop and I refresh, we're going to see something. So we'll see that there's a service worker that was installing and is waiting to activate. Now that's because you must remember the service worker is controlling this browser front end. So it might have network requests in flight. It's got a set of pre-cached assets that it's dependent on, and you don't necessarily want to just hard interrupt that, right? If you hard interrupt that, there could be things that break. But now, at the moment, we really want the fresh code, so I'm just going to skip waiting, force it to use the new service worker with the old code, and then reload the page so that it will use the new service worker. Now, when I do that, you'll see that the networking tab, now suddenly, all of the images are being fetched from the service worker and cached. So on this part, we've got, what, 4 images? So if we take a look at application cache, you'll see there's now an images cache that we specified by name in the strategy config. And if we look at that, we'll see that there are 4 images. As we then navigate to the new section, more images are added. And it keeps it, so those first 4 images have now fallen out because we're only going to keep track of 60 images. Now, importantly, I'm treating all of these images as the same, which they're not. Some of them are product images, and others are actual experience images. So you probably want to pre-cache the experience images that are essential to the application separately from like the product stuff. Because if a product image is missing, it's not amazing, but it's also not the end of the world. Okay, so that's images. Very similarly to this, we can do the exact same with JSON. So a whole bunch of this data is stored via JSON. Let me just show that quickly. If we look at the network panel, we can see the actual data is faked from the backend for this. So we're going to store the JSON data for the backend, but we're going to use another strategy called stale while revalidate. So what stale while revalidate is it's going to say, well, I'm going to fetch the stuff from the cache that's local, if it's there. I'm going to send it to the front end, let the front end actually respond instantaneously. Then I'm going to go to the back end and I'm going to fetch new stuff and update the cache. So there's no performance delay in that, right? You get fresh data in the cache. Next time you hit it, you'll get something new. Now, you obviously don't want to do this with everything that's critical, although there are options around how you would do that. If you really care about the data being as fresh as possible and then falling back to the cache if it's not fresh, you want to use the network first strategy. Try on the network. If the network fails, back off onto the cache. If it succeeds, update the cache, which is also a reasonable one. Does that make sense? And you can write your own strategy and you can plug into this stuff. You can ask Richard how to do that later. He's sitting over there. All right, so that's that stuff. We're not going to worry too much about running that one because we're going to run it later. We're now going to change gears. Okay, who works on server-side software? Okay, who works on an MVC application of some kind? Don't care whether it's .NET, Java, PHP, WordPress, doesn't matter. Okay, you work on server-side software. It's a thing that happens. This is not a client-side concern. And to show you for that, I've got a .NET application over, where is it? I forgot to start something. Okay, over here, that I'm going to run, .NET run, and hope it runs because it is .NET on a Mac, right? So very many exciting things could happen at this point in time. 5106, and this is functionally the exact same thing, okay? It's a C# .NET Core simple online store, okay? Now, when you take a look at it, from a network perspective, when we reload, that first request is the only thing that's server-side rendered. The rest of the stuff is assets that the page downloads. Okay? That's all stuff that the service worker can help you cache far more aggressively and far more effectively. So to show you this, I'm going to open this application, and I'm going to show you where the stuff sits. So this is going to be different depending on which server-side framework you're using. It's not wholly different between Spring Boot, .NET Core, and it's actually not very different to PHP. There's an amazing web series by Surma from the Chrome team, the Chrome Developer Advocate team, that he does this on a PHP application, which is incredible. So if you are stuck on, a WordPress application. So if you are stuck on WordPress, check that out. Anyway. But for .NET Core, it's got this folder called www.root that it stores all of these assets in. So this is the one that we really care about pre-caching. Okay? So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go and run Workbox Wizard. Again, my favorite command in that exact same directory. I don't think everyone can see that. I think you can see it now. I'm just going to go down to that www.root application or directory. I'm going to select everything this time because I just want you to cache all of it. Sure, just put it in the default place. Sure, just save it in the default place. And sure, I'm just going to run generate because I don't really care. Okay, and you'll see that there's 4.3 megabytes of stuff that it's going to pre-cache now. Maybe a bit heavy. You might not want to pre-cache all of that stuff because on first page load, it's going to download that. But having said it, it's just a 5-minute example. Now in here, the one thing we have to do is we need to install the service worker. Now if you're familiar with ASP.NET MVC, you'll know that there is this idea of layouts in Razor. So I'm going to go to this layouts file, and in the body, at the bottom of this body section, and you'll see that the body gets written into there. In the bottom of the body section, I am going to just create a script tag. I'm going to go and do the progressive enhancement thing. So if service worker, don't get the casing wrong, in navigator, then navigator.serviceworker.register, and then sw.js. Oh, damn it. sw.js. Okay. That should be that, and then from here I can just go .NET run again. Any questions? You asked a question at the back, which was pretty cool. Do you want a stress ball? You have a choice. Do you want a red one, or do you want one with a yellow one with a smiley face? An angry red one.
Can I have a yellow one?
Oh, my guy, you got a catch. Sure, that could have ended a lot worse. Why did your talk end early, Mike? Well, you see. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the application tab. This thing's running. I'm just going to refresh it. Oh, wait, I'm on cache storage. Damn it. I missed it. But you can see the service worker is installed and running. We look at the network tab, and we can see that it's immediately gone. And after loading, it's gone and fetched all of that stuff in service worker, right? It hit the network this time, but the next time we reload, suddenly there's, 30 things that the server-side rendered page doesn't have to download. Like that's a win as far as I'm concerned, and it's super cheap to do. And I can guarantee you almost every single one of your server-side applications does this. Okay. You can make this completely offline capable, but that requires some clever thinking on what offline means for you from a server-side rendered world. Okay. But I think that's enough .NET for 1 year, right? Or at least I hope so. Watch, this is going to come back and bite me, I promise you. Before I forget, I'm going to start this next part. Okay. Because that's gonna freak me out. Okay, so now we're in the space of this thing. Whenever we install a new service worker, we had that awful skip waiting experience, right? That sucks. That's not how we want to do things. So what we can do is we can wait. I need to close the .NET code. We can change that because we can automate it, and we can in here. Yeah, it's the right file. I can just call self.skipWaiting. At the bottom of the file, and it'll make sure that skip waiting, and it'll take control over every browser tab. But that's an awful user experience if you are dependent on, if you're starting to use the service worker more heavily. So we don't want to do that. Okay, that's a bad idea. What we want to do instead, what number was that to? 8. 8, yeah, I think it was 8. We want to listen to something called the install event. So we're telling the service worker, cool, when you've installed into the page, once you're done, then call this callback. Okay? And inside that, we can then do some stuff. And one of the things we can do is we can use this idea called a broadcast channel. Now, who's ever done any queuing-based work, right? PubSub? Okay. A little bit, doesn't matter. So this creates a PubSub communication channel that to every single browser tab and JavaScript process, worker, service worker, and front end that subscribes to it. And we can then say, well, okay, cool, here is this cross-tab, cross-thread channel, and we're going to post a message that says, I have now installed, prompt the user to reload. Okay? Oopsie. And then we can go to our index.html, and inside here, because remember, we can assume a whole bunch of stuff because we've checked that service worker is available. So I'm going to assume that broadcast channel is there because, you know, I'm not going to now sniff for broadcast channel separately. It's got a service worker. It must have this stuff, right? Or more than likely has all of this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to that exact same channel. I'm going to declare that channel called service worker channel, and then I'm going to subscribe to the on-message event. Okay? And on-message, I'm going to check, cool, look for, and the message has a whole bunch of plumbing-oriented, event-oriented stuff in it, but the data is the stuff that I actually sent to it, much like the fetch request. And on that data, I'm going to then look for the prompt to reload, which I set on the other side, and then I'm going to do my super classy, my web platform native method to prompt the user as to whether they, you know, very good UX. I'm relying on Chrome's UX team to prompt whether they want to check if updates are available, do they want to reload. Then they're going to say, cool, well, I'm going to tell the service worker, who's still on this exact same channel, that yes, I do want to reload. So skip waiting. So I'm going to post that exact same message. And now in the service worker, inside here, I can go and say, well, now I'm also going to listen to on-message, but I'm going to listen to something else. I'm going to look for the data that says skip waiting. If the front end tells me to skip waiting, I'm going to YOLO skip waiting and install. Okay. Assume that it's right. And you would be forgiven for thinking that this is all just going to work. But we've got stale code on the index.html that may have just said, yeah, okay, cool, update the service worker. Meanwhile, the stuff that the service worker is assuming that the front end has is completely different. So one thing you have to do, and there is a little bit of subtlety around this that I'm glossing over, but one thing you have to do is listen to a controller change event. Now, this event fires inside that page when the underlying service worker has changed. So this is saying that the service worker has changed. Okay, the best thing that I can do is probably reload the page. The assumption being that the user's been prompted about it. Okay, oopsie, don't break stuff. Now I'm going to not switch that off because that's going to be necessary just now. I've changed the index.html, so I do need to run an npm build. Any other questions, Solo?
Can the server worker channels communicate between different domains?
No, not between different, they're scoped to the path of the domain that they come from. So it's secure from that perspective, but the service worker can query external resources and cache those external resources, provided they respect the core's headers. Okay.
You had that whole method where you're doing broadcast channel to check if they can skip waiting.
Yes.
And then you go back into the service worker skipping waiting. Why not just listen for that and then reload the page when they agree to skip waiting? Won't they do the same thing?
What do you reload the page when they skip waiting? No, it won't. Because what's going to happen is the service worker is very, very permissive of the browser tabs. And if it thinks that there's a chance that the service worker might still be used by that page, even if it reloads, it won't necessarily force override. If you were to close all of those browser tabs and literally shut down Chrome and restart it, then Chrome is like, okay, awesome, I'm happy. Now this is a new session, I'll take over. And there are some heuristics around it, and the behavior is not completely cast in stone. Like there are some edge cases to be aware of. But typically you want to tell the browser when it can install if you want to force that behavior. And this is the UX that most progressive web apps at current use. This is the de facto standard. It's not amazing, it could be better, but it is the standard for now. Interestingly, the Angular Service Worker has a really, really nice injectable that does this stuff, where you can just, inside your application, inject a thing that'll listen to those events and let you prompt the user in an Angular space without having to write broadcast channel that exists outside of where Angular runs, okay, which is zone.js. What was I doing? I was serving, right? Okay. But good questions, good questions. Yellow or red? Do you want?
Red for me.
Red. Yellow or red?
Yellow.
Yellow. There we go. Good catch, gentlemen. Okay, now where were we? Right. So it's not going to work immediately, because when I refresh, you'll see that the service worker is waiting to activate because the code isn't in yet. So I'm just going to override all of that and reload. And now everything should be in the page. So I've skipped waiting, gotten the latest code, and I'm just going to create a relatively arbitrary white space change that's just going to change the hash that's generated in the service worker, right? I'm now going to, in that same directory, just rerun creating the service worker without changing anything. And we're going to see when I reload, it's installing. It then prompts us with this amazing Chrome UX that says updates available. Would you like to reload? And when we click OK, it reloads the page and hey, everything's happy. Okay. So that's the kind of behavior that you want. And that falls a little bit more into the UX aspect of when you're dealing with offline state and building this thing as an application. You want to respect the user. Okay. All right, so there's that. And then I'm going to go into one last demo. I would have liked it to be two more, and I'll explain why it's not. Okay, so the last demo is that this stuff is not necessarily offline, because this is looking at the content being available offline, right? Which is only part of it. We can't add new orders. So luckily, there is something that you can look at called background sync, which I'm just going to talk through some code. Now, background sync is a simple queue that's based off of IndexedDB that relies on the browser sync event to pick up when it should retry things potentially. So for this, you can install this very much like a plugin using a strategy, but I prefer to show how you then interact with like lower level network code, just to show that even with Workbox, you can then start digging deeper into what the browser APIs actually offer you, a little bit lower level. So we're going to, again, listen to an event, add a listener onto the fetch event. And now if you're not aware, the fetch event is basically the network stack $.ajax of yesteryear, right? It's the thing that's doing the AJAX request. So we're going to listen to the fetch event. We're going to get every event through here, every request that gets routed onto the network stack. So we're specifically going to look for a post method that matches orders, okay? Because that's where we're going to send this stuff. Then we need to actually handle that request ourselves because we could swallow this completely. So we're going to call fetch directly. We're going to clone the request and then send that on. And then on error, we're going to do something with it. Now, this is a really simple case because there could be lots of different reasons why it errors out, but I'm just taking it for as a simple example, assuming network failure on error. Okay. Then on error, we're going to add the request onto the queue. And now because we're intercepting network traffic, we have to return something. If we don't, the front end is going to assume that nothing has happened, right? It's just a dead request. So what we do is we fake this successful response and we return that, okay? And this is just to make sure that, because these are all callbacks and chained promises, that we immediately reply to the front end with what the eventual promise is going to be. Now, just to show what that all does, we just need to do that. I'm going to reload the page, which is now going to give me my new install experience. And then I'm going to go to men's outerwear. I'm going to go to the first item. I'm going to be frustrated at the fact that the shop only goes up to XL and they clearly don't cater for somebody my size. Like, they don't cater for the South African market is all I'm saying, guys. I'm just saying. I'm going to go add to cart. I'm going to proceed to checkout. And here I'm going to click this offline button to switch the network off, the network stack. Okay? And if you can see it, there's a little toast at the bottom that listens to the connected disconnect events and just informs the user that they're offline in this example application. This is the same as clicking offline over here, if you're used to clicking it on the network tab, right? So now here I'm going to enter in a whole bunch of stuff as if I am checking out. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's the right one. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's actually incredibly infuriating that they added validation to this. And as you may guess, this is not my actual credit card details. All right, so we're offline. We're going to place this order, and you'll see that the front end says, okay, cool, you're successful, you finished, right? And if we take a look, we'll see that there is this request that has been added to a queue. Okay, at the bottom there, can everyone see that? In the Workbox logs. Now what that means is in IndexedDB, which is the local NoSQL database, we'll see that there is this Workbox background sync DB that has a queue called pending orders that has one item on it. That's almost illegible, and you can't necessarily use this data meaningfully at the moment, but what we can do is we can be sure that that whole web request has been saved. We can then, if everything goes according to plan, please demo gods, rejoin the network over here. I'm just going to open this, clear that, rejoin the network. And when we rejoin, we see there are a whole bunch of logs where it says, cool, background sync for tag, Workbox background sync pending orders has been received, starting replay now. It's picked up that the network has reconnected and it's saying, cool, I'm going to try that event again. This has exponential backoff, so if that fails, it's going to wait a little bit longer and then try again, and then wait a little bit longer and then try again. And that's dependent on browser heuristics. I can't tell you, unfortunately. I wish I knew what those were, but it is a thing. And then following that, it will discard the message as being dead-lettered. So that's not good enough, but it's at least something that we can do, and we can listen to events to respond to that. Now, just to prove that the thing is gone, we've got this queue over here that we can refresh inside IndexedDB, and it is missing. Okay, which is pretty cool. Yes?
Yeah, good question. So how long does that request stay for in the queue?
Browser heuristics.
Okay, so then what happens if you close the tab?
It'll stay there because it's stored in physical storage, right? Yeah. So the backoff is the problem. So it's going to retry whenever it reconnects. If it doesn't reconnect, presumably it'll stay there until the browser decides that the whole site's data needs to be destroyed. So it'll stay for quite a while. I can't tell you exactly. I wish I knew without trying by trial and error.
So obviously IndexedDB is persistent. So if I close my browser tab,
Yes,
it will stick there, but
it does.
Serviceworker will die.
Serviceworker will die, yes. Okay, yeah, it does shut down. And that's important, right? You don't want a service worker running on your phone constantly that's checking for network access, because that's just going to kill your phone.
So is there a way that I can write code to say if the user closes the tab, you won't really be getting your shit?
You could, yeah, you can listen to those events. You can use the same broadcast channel events that says, channel's closed, notify the background worker to kill this queue, right? The stuff that's in this queue is not meaningful. You can do that stuff. You can plug into those things. You can move stuff because you can also listen to the sync events directly and catch errors and then move it out of this temporary queue into something that's a little bit more persistent, like local storage. Okay, well, the IndexedDB should be fine. I think the important thing that you want to make sure is that if there's the 3 failed attempts and Chrome decides it's going to throw away the data, it doesn't, depending on it. Okay, this is obviously a space that I'd like to see a lot more development happen, and I'm going to ask those questions and hopefully get satisfactory answers, but we'll see. This is, to my mind, in our use case, and this is where we differ from a Eurocentric market. The Eurocentric market has reliable internet. They might be disconnected this time, but in 2 minutes' time they'll be reconnected, right? We might not have internet until next week, Tuesday. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I have 2 sort of dumb questions, but I just need to know. Say, for instance, you had your app, you built your app using like the mean stack, right?
Yeah.
So now you wanted to turn it into a PWA. Is it as simple as just like generating a service worker using Workbox, or are there other like technicalities that go with turning it into a progressive web app?
There are other technicalities if you want to go like full offline, completely offline application. And PWA is a big thing. So you can get a lot of benefit with really little effort, like we saw in that .NET application where suddenly it was pre-caching everything and you got a major performance benefit out of that, right? There are things that you can do to make it progressively more PWA-like, and you just want to target those specifically. Speak to me afterwards. There's an amazing talk by Ivo Gasparovich from Google about turning a site into a PWA and looking at what features of that PWA do you need. You know, you don't need the buzzword, you need specific things, and this is what you look at. And this is how you go about making your site more modern. Okay. Yeah.
One more question.
No, go for it, as many as you want.
So looking at this prefetch feature, is there a way to get the server to participate in some form of bundling or
Yes.
bundling a thing?
Yes. There's lots of options there. It's possibly a bigger conversation. My eyes start going wild, and like I want to talk about that stuff. So perhaps offline, and we can have a discussion as soon as this is all done. And anybody's welcome to participate. Okay. There are things that you can do there. The last demo that I'm not going to get to that I wanted to, and that's primarily because I don't really understand it well enough yet, is the JavaScript Streams API. So Workbox has great access to something called the Streams API, where you can basically intercept, unpack, and operate on a stream. So like, let's say you were fetching an image, you could grayscale it in process and then return it. Or more meaningfully, and one of the architectures that people recommend is for a server-side application saying, well, I'm going to take a stream that represents my local host request for the home page, and I'm going to separately under the hood fetch the header, the sidebar, the body, and the footer separately. And then I'm going to cache the header, the sidebar, and the footer, and not the body. And then next time I make a request, think about articles, for example's sake. Get the fresh article, but all of the rest of that stuff comes from the service worker that's cached locally, but return it to the front end as if it's just a simple HTML page that's been cobbled together. Okay. Now, saying that is one thing. Doing that is something else, though. Anyway, but maybe that's just me. Yes?
Okay, I've got 2 questions on that quick. Although this is dangerous with the amount of Java and Kotlin guys here. But say, for example, you have an app that you built in something like Ionic. Is there any reason why you couldn't put a service worker into any app like that? So as an example, if you had articles or a chat app and there are images inside there, you don't want to pull those images down every single time.
Correct.
You can cache all of those images with a service worker built inside your Ionic app. Is there any reason you can't?
No. Ionic is the ideal use case for service worker, and that's because you're bundling it with a version of Chrome that you can predict has service worker, predict has all of these features, and you can guarantee that the users of that application will get benefit of this stuff, right? And then you've got the mechanisms inside your Ionic application without having to roll your own caching, right?
Which is what most people do. I don't know why.
Exactly.
Service worker solves it.
Exactly. To use service worker to get the benefit. Like it's the perfect use case.
Okay, last question for me.
I think we're going to ask that guy, and then you can ask the second one. Yep.
No, sorry, it's not serious as you are, but thank you for putting over.
Yes. It actually really upset me that I couldn't find very many black wizards. Like, that bugged me, man. Like, I struggled. Anyway, but yeah.
So random one. Google's Firestore offers offline caching. Isn't that exactly what Firestore is?
No, not exactly, right? Firestore uses some of the same stuff. It's got probably far more graceful fallbacks in the stuff that it supports, but it's definitely far more mature. The problem with it is that it's a separate library, right? It's not necessarily platform native. And the reason why we like this stuff is because platform native stuff is going to stick around. If Firebase goes the route of Google+, sorry, am I allowed to say that here? Am I going to get into trouble? But if Firebase goes the route of Google+ in a couple years' time, everything built on top of it is seriously at risk. The stuff that we're putting into the web platform, barring a few rare examples, will not be removed from the web platform. That's why we've got standards bodies, right? Which is, from a old-fashioned corporate developer like me, I like moving forward in a cohesive manner, stuff that's going to stick around. Okay, but that's me.
Questions?
There were questions.
JetBrains voucher for grants of any JetBrains product that you
Okay.
that you
What was the command, the amazing Chrome UX command that prompted the user on the front end? Confirm. There you go. Cool. That's me. I'm done.